Okay, my name's Rich Hughes. I'm from Clearfield, Pennsylvania, just 7 miles downriver here from Currwensville. And we're at the site today of the Bicentennial Raft, the 2004 Clearfield Bicentennial Raft. This whole project got started about 4 years ago. When I was 18, I was on the 1976 Bicentennial Raft that left Miller's Landing and went the whole way to Hawk Haven. And I was impressed with that. And I knew this year was the bicentennial of our county, and I knew that there were various projects going on around the county, such as parades and fireworks, and women were making quilts. But I thought that the raft, because it's such a big part of our heritage, and that I thought that it would involve a different group of people who wouldn't be participating in the bicentennial at all, I thought this might be a nice project. By acquaintance, I met Lynn Robbins of Robbins Lumber from Atlanta, Pennsylvania, and I talked to him about a year and a half ago. And when I met him, I knew we were going to build the raft because he didn't flinch. His ancestors were some of the first raftsmen in the county, dating back to the 1820s. He seemed excited. So then I had to find somebody who would more of a craftsman type of guy who could make some of these pins and some of the sashes, and some of the straps. I bumped into Gary Gilmore down at the museum, Clearfield County Historical Society, and after meeting Gary, I knew this thing was going to happen. This past winter, we had several meetings, and the meetings were about the logistics of the raft. Actually procuring the logs, divvying up the work, giving different people assignments. We met in January, we met in February, and then obviously we had some conversations. We brought Lynn Frank in, who was the pilot of the 1976 raft. Lynn now is in his 80s, and he gave us some great advice. I actually drew up the drawings, and like I said, for the last 2 months we've been working on this, getting ready for the day. We knew we'd have a good turnout. We didn't want to waste the help, so we divvied up different tasks. We have Jerry Bloom doing the drilling of the holes on the raft. We have Gary Gilmore doing some of the more talented things, such as making the sash straps and the sash poles and the oars. And then we had Boy Scouts. I want to engage young people here because I was a young kid in 1976, and that's why we're here today. So hopefully some kid, 25, 30 years from now, when I'm an old man, will run another raft. Rafting was a big part of our heritage in the 19th century. Obviously it transitioned from timbering into coal, but these rafts were very common on this section of the river. They float from here to Harrisburg. There'll be thousands of them leave here every year. So
have you had any problems or things that didn't quite go right in the first couple of days of doing it? Has it gone smoother than you thought?
I'm extremely impressed with, we have a lot of talented people here that are helping out. We have had no hitches, essentially no hitches. One interesting thing is we thought it would take 3 weeks to build it, and we actually built it in 3 days. The water came up between the first week and today. Today's the second week. The 6th of March. But other than that, it's gone really smooth. Nobody's been hurt. I feel fortunate there. Like I said, we plan ahead in between the weeks. Like I said, we've used the Central Hotel in Currwensville. They've been really accommodating to us. And it's been very enjoyable. I think everybody, there's 110 people last week. We have about the same this week. And I think everybody's proud of this thing, and it's drawn a lot of attention, and that's what the Bicentennial is about. Teaching people about our heritage. This wasn't just a recreational raft. This thing would float downriver and it would be sold. So that's why we're here.
You spent a lot of time in the water last week. It's a little bit higher this week.
Yeah, the water last week was about 3 feet deep, and this week it's about 6 feet. So fortunately we established all 3 platforms last week. We still have some pinning to do today, which we're finishing up on. But the platforms are essentially finished, and we're going to be erecting the cabin here at lunchtime.
How much water do you need to float the raft?
The key for this whole trip is getting over the Clearfield Rassens Dam. We need about 19 inches of water to go over the dam. Now today we probably have about 2.5 feet, but this water will subside in the next 2 weeks. And we're working with the Corps of Engineers to give us a discharge out of the Currwensville Dam.
There's a lot of people here that are dressed in various period costumes. they just all
That
gravitate to the project, or do you invite some of them? Or
That's the element of Gary Gilmore's crew. When I met Gary Gilmore at the Clearfield Historical Society, he said he had a group of guys who would show up in period clothing and would do some of the work that needs a little bit more craftsmanship on it. And those gentlemen, some of those work for the Park Service at the Cook's Forest. Others work are foresters. One of the gentlemen works at Parker Dam. So in fact, one of them's a school teacher. But they're all talented. They take it serious. As you can see, their tools are period tools, period clothes, and they've been tremendous. I mean, they've just filled in a big void that I was concerned about a year ago.
how many people have participated? We signed a checklist off on.
Last week, we had about 110 people here, and about 94 actually signed the guest book there, the workers. And it's been quite simple. People ask me, how do you get a ride on the raft? It's real simple. If you help, you get the ride. I mean, this took a lot of work, and no one single person here's killed themselves, exerting themselves, because we have so much help. That's what makes it fun.
I don't know. Gary looks like he's about killing himself at times, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Gary's worried about it. We need a couple guys on the thinking committee, and he's on it.
You had nice plans drawn up. How did they come to be put together?
I worked with Lynn Frank on that. Those plans are developed from Dudley Tonkin's drawings from the 1938 raft. And we wanted this thing to be identical to the original rafts, and so I developed those in my office. They were developed on a CAD system. We revised them a little bit. I met with Lynn Frank, and then once we settled on the exact size of the raft, and we wanted to make sure it was authentic, we finalized it.
Well, I'm Lynn Frank, and I'm here as an advisor to help the construction of this Bicentennial Raft, 2004 Clearfield County Bicentennial Raft, actually. And the West Branch of the Susquehanna River was a very famous rafting river, and the rafts that went down were the square timbered rafts, the round timbered rafts, the board rafts, the spar rafts. The spars were used for the mast for the clipper ships and naval vessels, and then you had the barges that went down. Of course, not on this part of the West Branch, but further down below Williamsport, down in that area. This was actually the West Branch, and the other river systems in the state were the water highways. And this was the only means of getting raw timber products out of the forest to run down the river with this timber in the form of rafts to downriver markets. Many of the sawmills below Williamsport depended upon the round timbered rafts to make forest products on their sawmill. Now, rafts were never constructed in one solid piece. They had to be put together in what the raftmen called platforms, and they had to be built in such a manner that they could hinge, and this enabled them to go down over dams and through raft chutes and through the very rapid parts of the river. That if they were built solid, when they went over these obstructions, the front end would dive into the bottom of the river, and the raft would break apart, and of course the raftsmen would be cast into the cold floodwaters. Rafting started on the West Branch in 1838, and by 1840 it was a very profitable business. And this whole watershed, that is the West Branch watershed, was covered with virgin forest, and the white pine is what they were after because it's such a desirable wood for interior and exterior construction. And the These rafts were controlled by sweeps or oars on the front and on the rear, and the big market for on the West Branch was down at Lock Haven. There were three divisions that the West Branch raftsmen designated. The first division was Lock Haven, as I mentioned previously. The second was down at Marietta, and the third was at Chesapeake Bay. That's where all the spar rafts went. Also, they also had oak rafts, where they required at least 10% of the timbers to be white pine to keep the oak afloat. Actually, it was white oak that they were that was most preferred. This white oak was used for dock timbers and for the ribbing of the ships to which you put the plank on. And the market at Lock Haven, it's been estimated that 100,000 rafts tied up there during the 80 years of rafting on the West Branch. The rafts were not all utilized at Lock Haven. If they didn't get a good price, why the raft crew would take the raft on downriver and stop at the different sawmills till they got a better price for their rafting. So there's so much about this river that's very historical. In fact, it was the only river in Pennsylvania that had the great log drives. These are the loose floating logs, and they went to the downriver booms, with the exception of Currwensville, which had a boom for the Currwensville Lumber Company near where the tannery building is located now. And if you go to Pee-wee's Nest or Irwin Park and you stand at the dam there and look downriver, you'll see these mounds in the river. Well, that's the remnants of the booms. And these booms were made with cribs built up log cabin style and built about 10 feet above flood stage, and then they were filled with rock. Then between the piers were floating timbers chained end to end that fluctuated with the rise and fall of the river. And the loose floating logs from the upper West Branch, out of Chest Creek, the upper headwaters of the West Branch, out of all the streams, logs were floated into the West Branch and down to these booms. The first one was at Lock Haven. Then there was a big boom at Williamsport. That was a Susquehanna boom. And then Montoursville and Muncie. And there were sawmills located there that converted those logs into lumber products. In fact, the Williamsport boom, or Susquehanna boom, was the largest boom on the river, and it would hold 300 million board feet of logs. That is, you could get 300 million board feet of lumber from those logs. The boom at Lock Haven was 3 mile in length, and it would hold 100 million board feet. And I forgot to mention that the boom at Williamsport was 7 miles long from the city upriver. So that gives you an overall view of how important the West Branch of the Susquehanna River was. Those sweeps, they had to have a blade at least 16 inches wide. This one is 18, the blades, and 16 feet long. And they are mortared into what they call the oar stem, and pinned in, 3 pins. And the front of the oar is rounded, and the back of the oar is rounded, because going over rocks, if it was left square, that hit a rock would just tear that blade right off, probably the oar stem off the head block. And what the fellows are doing now is balancing that oar stem on the head block so that they can maneuver the front and the back, to be one on the front and the rear, by lifting up on the oar stem. The oar stem is balanced on that head block. When they lift up on the oar stem, the blade goes in the water, Then if they want to go to the right bank, they have to go to the right bank to miss a bridge, pier, or rock. They point that blade to the right bank, direction of the right bank, and then the fellows get on one side and lift up and push it over. Then they have to run back, and it's the same repeated repetition. Then if it's the left bank, they put the blade towards the left bank. And then they have to get over on the other side of the raft and lift up, and the blade goes in the water, and they push it over. Then one of the fellows pulls down on the oar, and that lifts the blade out of the water. So that's how this raft is navigated. And this has to be done to go around the sharp turns or to go between certain bridge piers and so on. And the rear has to always be lined up with the front. Yes, we were wading in water up to our ankles, and there were 15 of us on board, and so they don't ride too high out of the water.
I'm Lynn Robbins, and I live on that old land on Turkey Hill. My family's lived there since 1869. My granddad was a rafter and logger. I'm in the lumber business. Richard Hughes contacted me 2 years ago. We ran into each other, and he said he'd like to build a raft for the Centennial. So we went to 2 years before we talked about it again, and then last month he said we're going to build that raft. So I cut about 50 large hemlock trees, trying to keep them 20 inches at the butt, and cut them 40 foot, 35s and 30s. And we hauled them in here with tractor and trailer and unloaded them, brought the front end loader, got some real good guys to help here, advertised for a little bit of help, just that they can ride the raft. There's their only reward. And here we are, everybody's digging in, and the first day we built almost better than half the raft. The second day we had it all in the river. We're on our third day, and we're going to finish it today. They're making the paddles now. And then hopefully we'll have enough water on the 20th. We're going to go down the river. There's 12,000 board feet of logs in a raft, plus another 2,000 feet of lumber and squared stuff that would be on the house on the raft, and weighing about 80,000 pounds, or 80 tons, 160,000 pounds. And the sweeps will steer it, and hopefully we're going to have a trip down the river here on the 20th. So that's pretty much the story I know.
Everybody on a lash pole. The guys are just like that. Across the river and this is cool. Got enough rope? I don't really care. Like too much.
I'm like a blue, bro. I'm already.
I'm Gary Gilmore, resident of Luthersburg, Brady Township, and I've been, ever since I was 16 years old, I've been interested in old-fashioned logging, lumber history, and the techniques that the people used back then for, making log rafts or buildings and barns and such. Well, this project is rather interesting. You see, I've been demonstrating at Woodhick Weekend up at Parker Dam, probably 15 years or more. I used to do blacksmithing, but I got tired of that because it was what I did for a living, so I decided to do woodworking instead, which was a hobby. And in the course of that events, I made several little log rafts, about 10 feet long, splitting out the bows, driving the pins in, involving the crowd, and drilling the holes. So when the opportunity came for building a full-scale log raft, I jumped right on it. I happened to know Richard Hughes through his wife Kathy from the Historical Society, and I was talking to him, and he was concerned about, well, he could get the logs, he could get the manpower, but he had no idea how to get the bows built and the raft pinned together. And I said, well, that's simple. It's just white oak and you split it. And when that happened, he says, the raft will be a go. So that's how I got involved with this. Now, my involvement in this project was more than just making the bows, because like I said, I've had a little bit of experience building small-scale log rafts, and I've also studied the history of how they did it. And so in making this raft, there are certain critical components of it. One is the bows, the other is the oar sweeps, and making sure the raft's put together with integrity. And other than Lynn Frank and maybe one or two other people here, I don't think there's anyone else who's had experience actually building a full-scale log raft. So I'm kind of running around here, keeping, working with making sure the sweeps are made correctly, the bows. Now, fortunately, I have a crew of guys, Eric Rensel and Dale Luthringer and Dennis Murray, and Tom Lissack was here last week. These guys have all had some experience in historical woodworking. So fortunately, I basically turned that over to them and they took off with it. But the details of putting the raft together, which logs go where the bobbers are, I'm running down to the raft, running up here to the sweep, and also I have a lot of the hand working tools that would be needed for this project. We started this project last Saturday. It's now a week later, and when we started putting the logs in the river, they would not float because there wasn't enough water. We were actually rolling the logs in the river and dragging them along the stream bottom to get them in place. So it was kind of a lot of work. A lot of guys were in the water with waders, pushing the logs, pulling and prying, and trying to get them across the gravel bottom. Now we are a week later. Temperatures in the 70s. The 1 foot snowpack has melted, and the river is up a good 5 feet from what it was. And now, instead of dragging, because they're well tied, there's no danger of them floating down the river. But our raft is definitely floating now, and with the high water, it makes it a little easier to put the raft together. This is ideal rafting water. It's very high, and today would be a great day to go if we were ready. But that's not a part of the schedule. However, back in the 1800s, you would have seen raft after raft going down the river in high water like this. This is rafting water. Now, our hope is that when we're ready to float this raft, we will have high water. But human schedules and God's schedules do not always coincide. So we do have the Currwensville Dam. We're working with them trying to get a release of water to float the raft. If that happens, great. If it doesn't, then we're going to have to wait for nature to give us the amount of water to float.
Yeah.
Now, our raft is made out of hemlock. The first rafts, which they floated around 1840, were made of white pine, because white pine was the premier wood at the time. It was straight grained, very easily to make into construction material, and like I said, it was a premier wood. As the white pine was depleted, the market still increased for lumber, and so they came back into the woods and made a second cut, this time for the hemlock. Now, the hemlock had two values. One was the bark was now usable for the tanning industry. As a matter of fact, Currwensville Tannery up here used to take hundreds of cords of bark for their process. So the bark of the hemlock was valuable, and now they needed the lumber, which came from the hemlock, because the white pine was being depleted. So they took whatever they could. So later on, the rafts were made out of hemlock, and that's what this raft is made of. It's hard to find nice quality white pine these days. Hemlock seems to be fairly readily available because it's just a low value wood, but it works for this raft and for historical purposes. It is correct. Now, in raft building, the primary wood that they're shipping, that they're making the money on, is either the white pine or the hemlock that's in the raft. These rafts were floated to market, cut into lumber, and then sold. Now, to get the logs from here, the headwaters of the Susquehanna, down to the mills, which were Lock Haven, Williamsport, and such, they tied these logs together to make rafts. It's important to use the right type of wood, and these loggers knew that. And so they used white oak for the sash poles, or the lash poles that held the logs together. White oak's a very springy, very tough wood, very flexible. Likewise, the bows that go over the lash pole are also made out of white oak. And that's the reason is they can bend them and they don't break. Now, on either side of that lash pole, you have two holes drilled in. The staple or the bow went in those holes, and then pins were driven into those holes to hold the lash pole in place. And those pins were typically ash, which was a tough wood, very resilient. You could also use hickory or oak, even white oak. The oar is made out of white pine, the long sweep, because it grows very small and very tapered, so it had the strength for the oar, which is actually 40 feet long, and the blade is another 16 feet long. So we're talking around 50 feet of oar hanging in the water, or ballast on the raft to maneuver it through the stream. So knowing the different woods, knowing their strengths, they coupled them together and made a very substantial raft. Matter of fact, even the first rafts that they used, they didn't have rope up here. This was wilderness. And they made rope out of hickory bark. And they'd actually strip the bark off of hickory trees, twist it, and that would be a very strong rope that they used before they got the jute or the hemp rope that they used later on. There were no iron fixtures in the raft. Everything was made out of wood. In the building this raft, we took some liberties in using modern tools such as chainsaws, electric drills, and such. Back in the 1800s, this had all been done by hand. We only flattened one side of the log. One of it is for speed, and the other reason is it'd take fewer logs to build the raft. Now, traditionally, they tended to square all four sides. There were some rafts that were only squared on one side, so there's a whole mixture of different techniques. But we did use a chainsaw. All the pins and the sweeps I made with this little broad hatchet. Some hand tools are actually quicker than modern tools, and we used electric drills also. Drill it using a hand auger to drill 2-inch holes. We just aren't in shape enough right now. If we'd been doing it for the past 3 months, we'd probably be in shape, but just for speed, we did use some modern amenities.
you did today, huh? See what you did this weekend, you can do better next week.
And then sold. Now, to get the logs from here, the headwaters of the Susquehanna, down to the mills, which were Lock Haven, Williamsport, and such, they tied these logs together to make rafts. It's important to use the right type of wood, and these loggers knew that. And so they used white oak for the sash poles, or the lash poles that held the logs together. White oak's a very springy, very tough wood. Very flexible. Likewise, the bows that go over the lash pole are also made out of white oak. And that's the reason is they can bend them and they don't break. Now, on either side of that lash pole, you have two holes drilled in. The staple or the bow went in those holes, and then pins were driven into those holes to hold the lash pole in place. And those pins were typically ash, which was a tough wood. Very resilient. You could also use hickory or oak, even white oak.
historical interpretation. Gary knows me, and he knew I'd be interested in the project here. You guys need
Sort of volunteer at the same time.
Yeah. Well, he knew I was going to be in for it, and as soon as he told me about it, I was in.
Yeah, make sure you rock it and get all four sides. You know that. Oh,
Huh? Looking pretty good, huh?
yeah, let's see. Still burning in the middle.
It's important to use the right type of wood, and these loggers knew that. The oar is made out of white pine, the long sweep, because it grows very small and very tapered, so it had the strength for the oar, which is actually 40 feet long, and the blade is another 16 feet long. So we're talking around 50 feet of oar hanging in the water, or balanced on the raft to maneuver it through the stream. That was a mistake.
Throw something else under the jar.
Okay, we'll radius this one down. Okay, we're going to flip it up, turn it flat.
Go by, ring the doorbell, no light. Ring your doorbell 3 times, no lights come on. We messed the 2 interchange degrees yesterday.
Those sweeps, they had to have a blade at least 16 inches wide. This one is 18, the blades, and 16 feet long. And they are mortared into a oar, what they call the oar stem, and pinned in, 3 pins. And the front of the oar is rounded, and the back of the oar is rounded, because going over rocks, if it was left square, that would hit a rock would just tear that blade right off. Probably the oar stem off the head block. And what the fellows are doing now is balancing that oar stem on the head block so that they can maneuver the front and the back, to be one on the front and the rear, by lifting up on the oar stem. The oar stem is balanced on that head block. When they lift up on the oar stem, the blade goes in the water. Then if they want to go to the right bank, they have to go to the right bank to miss a bridge, pier, or rock. They point that blade to the right bank, direction of the right bank, and then the fellows get on one side and lift up and push it over. Then they have to run back, and it's the same repeated repetition. And this has to be done to go around the sharp turns or to go between certain bridge piers and so on. And the rear has to always be lined up with the front.
Flat side, slide up the street.
Put them on the top of your head, that's what I always do. Our boys going down there walking. Hands up!
Oh, they're just trying to get the tow rope over yet.
Right in
right there.
Oh, I'm having a lot of stuff.
Last week, they were trying to steer, but instead of steering away from it, they steered right into it.
They really messed up with that.
I wonder if they stopped the water at the damn
Hey,
house.
we'll see you later.
See you later.
Hey, get that FX.
Hey there, Bill. Mr. Bish.
I hear something, but I can't see anything.
Yeah, look into the sun.
Hi.
Gary. Okay, bring the other end then down the bridge. Just walk it on down. You're going to see a back end coming around. On the roof forward, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Sit. Okay. It's perfect. That's right where we want it, right there. Hey, Roger, we're okay, buddy.
Clearfield.
We're okay.
Well, what better say now than 145 minutes ago? Right.
You should say that pretty soon, huh?
Yeah. Did you hear him earlier?
No.
Where's that film? Ooh, you don't care.
Stand this way, Abs. Come on,
Why, I'm Lynn Frank, and I'm here as an advisor to help the construction of this Bicentennial Raft, 2004 Clearfield County Bicentennial Raft, actually. And the west branch of the Susquehanna River was a very famous rafting river, and the rafts that went down were the square timber rafts, the round timber rafts, the board rafts, the spar rafts. The spars were used for the mast for the clipper ships and naval vessels. Yeah, this was actually the west branch, and the other river systems in the state were the water highways. And this was the only means of getting raw timber products out of the forest to run down the river with this timber in the form of rafts. I was asked to supervise the construction of the 1976 Bicentennial Raft. That was Clinton County's project. The lumberman who owned a sawmill, Jim McGuire by name, and was a pulpwood producer, He went to the Clinton County Bicentennial Commission in 1975 and said, what do you think about taking a raft down the river for the bicentennial year? And of course they jumped on it because Lock Haven was a great rafting market. And so they started to cut the timber, but here they found that they couldn't find anybody that knew how a raft went together, how it was built, and all the old-time raftsmen were deceased. Well, as a young fella, I stood on the river bank at Clearfield in 1938, and this was the 1938 last raft that tied up at Clearfield for the night. And I didn't have the opportunity to meet Dudley Tonkin, but I did 20 years later when I bought his book, My Partner of the River. And I spent a lot of time with Dudley, and he was living in a rooming house at Clearfield. And I took him in my pickup truck on the weekends up and down the river. And he told me all about rafting, how rafts were put together, how they were built, and how they were maneuvered. So I had that knowledge, and somehow or other the Clinton County Bicentennial Commission found out about me and contacted me if I would supervise and also pilot the raft down from Miller's Landing. That's located a little over 3 miles upriver from Carthage down to Lock Haven. Well, I jumped at the opportunity because it was actually an opportunity of a lifetime. And we built a raft, platform raft. It was 24 feet wide, or 26 feet wide, and it was 110 feet long. And well, it took 3 tractor trailers, long wheelbase trailers, to move each one of those platforms to Miller's Landing above Carthage. We had, of course, all the holes drilled, the lash poles, all the material to build a raft, and which McGuire supplied. And the raft was, as I said, built at Miller's Landing. And anyhow, the weight of that raft was 80 tons of timber. And the reason we knew exactly what it was because the tractor trailer drivers had to weigh their loads that they were hauling on the highway system, and it totaled 80 tons. So we had 15 volunteers, and they all showed up for the day. We went down the river, took the raft down to the river to Lock Haven. We had to have it there before the July the 4th, the celebration for the 200th anniversary of our country. So we were able to get it in there in plenty of time, and tied up. Gave the people an opportunity to get on the raft and just inspect it. So that's that covers everything.